All right, as you probably can tell, I'm behind on grading. I am going to try to catch up in the next couple days. There is a folder out there under the P drive for the class with today's date on it if you want to go copy that over. It's up to you. What I've done is gone over the stuff in chapters 12 and 13 and everything that's in there as far as being on a table or whatever. I've made copies, I've got example copies of it. And there's also some articles that I've found on different ways that you can do validation. All right. Take a look at that if you have an interest. And again, like I said, there's stuff for chapter 12 and there's stuff for chapter 13 in there. All right. And somehow I got logged out. Great. So we have now gone through parts 1 and 2 of the book. Part 3, as you can see up on the screen here, are chapters 12, 13, 14, and 15. The plan is to go over chapters 12 and 13 today. All right, and I don't know how much time that's going to take. Go over 14 and 15 on Wednesday. And also, I did promise I was going to show you what I've been working on for the project, and I did, except I left it at home. I can show you what I've got done, but this is the original version, so it's I don't even know where it is. But I'll show it to you before we finish today because it's in here someplace. I didn't do real much, as you can see, but what I did was I got rid of the product, services, and support I put here, and I put in the contact forms. But there's my homepage. Again, I just literally grabbed the BTC logo and the Uber logo and combine them together. Like I said, there's not much in there. The About page, I grabbed stuff from Uber's page. All right. And again, like I said, there's not all that much in it. I said some of you have you're going real nuts and did all sorts of stuff, and boy, yours looks a heck of a lot better than mine. Some people did theirs and it's very generic in nature. What I'm hoping is by the end of the period on Wednesday, that we're going to go over, like I said, 12 and 13 today, 14 and 15 on Wednesday, and I'll give you the next assignment. And then again, you will have next week to work on it. And then 2 weeks from now, which is the week before break, we'll go over, again, then chapters 16, 17, 18, and 19. And you'll get your next assignment, but you'll have more time to work on that. You'll probably have 2 weeks when we come back. All right? And then we'll just see where we are at that time. We're doing great in here time-wise. Maybe you think we're going too fast. I don't know. But that should actually give us time to go over the Angular stuff also. All right. So chapter 12 starts in the book on page 321. And as you can see right here, enhancing user interaction through jQuery animation and other special effects. Most of the chapter is on jQuery and different ways that you can animate. And again, as I already mentioned, if you do come out there and look at it, you don't have to do this with me or anything, but these are the examples basically that they talk about in the chapter. All right, and they're just, some of them I created, some of them I just grabbed from online, but it's all stuff like this. All right. We've talked a little bit about animation before as well. So understanding animation fundamentals, creating sliding elements, creating image galleries using simple resize and transparency animations, implementing expandable and collapsible elements, how to delay animations for better effects, and how to animate element movement for dynamic web pages. Yeah, you will be asked to do some of this stuff, again, in the next assignment. All right. So as mentioned here, when you're working with jQuery and you want to animate, you have to figure out what property it is, all right, that you want to animate. And there's only certain things that you can animate, all right? And we'll get into those as we get on in here. As it says, most of this stuff is done via the animate method. I don't want to read to you. and they give you an example right here. All right, as it says, the following code animates the height and width properties of the image. All right. Now, here's the key thing. You can only animate things which actually have a numeric value. As they mentioned right there, you can't animate a border style, but you can animate its size. So you can do a lot of things when you work on it, but it's also, if you probably have seen that on certain sites, it's very easy to over-animate, all right, deluge a person with all sorts of stuff on there where the actual purpose of the website is sort of lost. Cool animations, all right, but what was it supposed to be doing? I don't know, type of an idea. All right. When you work with this, you may or may not have seen this stuff, and we're going to look at this table that's on page 323 in just a second. But as it says, there's a couple ways that you can set up animations. All right, so notice the first one allows you to specify duration, easing, and complete as optional arguments. The second allows you to specify the options in a single mapping object. There's really no difference between those. All right, you can do them either way. So the first table that you see here, notice what they have. Complete defines a function that will be called when the animation is completed. Again, I'm not going to sit there and say, well, I want you to put an animation into your BTC Uber site, and when you're done, put an alert that says you're done, because to me that's dumb. But that's a lot of the types of examples that are given as far as these complete. It's like a callback function. So in other words, it's saying when you have completed something, you want something else to happen. The duration on this, again, notice what it says. All right, it says the optional string values are slow and fast, and if you put nothing in there, I think it'll take normal too for just about anything. All right, and notice what it says. If no duration is specified, the normal is 400 milliseconds, which is a little less than half a second. But again, it depends on what it is you're trying to do and who your audience is. I can't say that stuff too much. Again, if you're doing an animation for older people, all right, you probably want to really slow down your duration. If you're doing it for kids or if you're doing it for a game, you can make it almost as fast as you want to or need to have it done. All right. Easing, if you've never seen this before, and I had it, I was looking for it right before class and I couldn't find it, but there are quite a few sites, and like I said, I had one marked, and I don't know where I put it, but this was it. All right, I like this one. I was out there looking yesterday. It's MatthewLeon.com. Big deal, right? Well, choose an easing type. Notice he's got drop-down lists, and he's got all sorts of different types. So for instance, if I have ease in bounce, how do you want it done? Slide down. The duration, 1 second. And you can really see what's going on when you do that. Like I said, I looked at quite a few sites. This one was the one I liked most out of all of them. Because if what a lot of them had was they had literally like a picture. It looked like something arithmetic, almost something trigonometric, where it had easing and it just had arcs and stuff in there. But when you pressed it, the arc would just go like this. It wouldn't really do much. Where if you look at something like this, to me, this is a much better example. All right, so if I wanted to possibly use something in here, if I wanted to maybe use swing, and I want it to maybe fade toggle or something, all right, it might make me look at that and say I'd want to do that or I wouldn't want to do that type of an idea. Some of the stuff doesn't go together very well either when you take a look at it, all right? All right. Notice queue, as it says, can be true, meaning the animation will be queued up behind the others, or false, meaning that it'll start immediately. And this goes along, there's also a stop that's in there. Because sometimes what happens, if you have never noticed this before, if you set up animation, so I might have it set up that if I might have a series of images, and if I click on an image, something happens to it. It expands or whatever. But what can screw up animation is you click on something and it starts to do something and you click on something else. All right? And then the first thing may or may not complete depending on how it's been programmed. All right? And that's what they're talking about in here. Step, as it says, specifies a function executed each step in the animation until it's completing. And there's not just easing, there's special easing. All right. As it says, it allows you to do different easing for different elements. And I'd say when you're first starting, like I said, go out to the site I mentioned to you, this Animate demo, or wherever it was, the MatthewLeon.com, or take a look at something like that. All right. Not only can you start animation as mentioned there, you can stop it. So notice the example that they give here. That should make sense to everybody. That pauses or stops all animations. I don't know why you'd want to do that, but there might be a very valid reason that you would want to. Notice you can go further than that, as it says when you call stop and you add true to it, it stops all animations at the current point and removes all animations from the queue. All right, so if you want to basically shut everything down. Quite often when you work with animations, you might use delaying, and again, that's just for effect. All right. You can have a really cool animation, but if you have one thing happen after another thing, the person might not have even noticed the first thing. Or maybe you've seen that where somebody has something go up and down, then maybe sideways or whatever, and it all happens so fast that you don't even know what's going on. All right, again, if you want to see these, because I'm going over them quickly, I realize it, but if you want to see these in action, just take a look at the examples that I showed you, or that I told you that I put out there. All right. And the author is quick to mention here. It says the delay method is great for delaying between queued effects, but it's not a replacement for the set timeout function. So as always, you know, the best thing to do is sit there and try doing whatever it is you want to do in a couple different ways. Have other people look at it, all right, and see what they think. Notice there's something that's called promise that you can add. Allows you to apply functionality after all actions bound to the object set are completed. All right, and I put some examples of that in there. So it says the following code waits for animations to complete, then changes the text to complete. All right. Most of the stuff that you're going to see with animations is the stuff that's mentioned now. Show and hide, toggle, all right. Slide up, slide down, slide toggle, fade, fade toggle, fade to, etc. And that's what they talk about for most of the rest of the chapter in here. All right. So again, you should be able to take a look at an example like this, and hopefully at least it'll make sense. Now that's a lot of stuff, but even if you just had the box, you know, even if it was just this part, to figure out exactly what's happening. And again, as mentioned before, it's very easy to overuse this stuff. All right. You'll notice that hide, just like show, they both have callbacks. So if you decide that you want to add something when either the hide has been completed or the show has been completed, or for that matter, when a toggle has been completed. All right. And a lot of times what you see, if you take a look at examples that are out there on the net when you're trying to learn this stuff, they'll put 3 buttons. And they'll say something like hide, show, and toggle. All right. You click hide, and you've got a div or something on the screen. It goes away. You click show, it comes back. All right. And you click toggle, it does both. You know, a toggle is just basically an inverter type of an idea. I don't like most of the examples that they put in here. All right. So you can see with the first one, you've got the Statue of Liberty. The idea is you click on it, and it very slowly collapses, and it fades away. All right. And to be honest with you, I had some problems with it. It didn't like the way the image folder was being accessed, at least on mine. All right. You can use fade-ins and fade-outs, same kind of thing. All right, what's the difference between hide and show? Typically, when you're fading something in and fading something out, you're working with opacity. All right, and you might have something that's just partially showing to begin with, and you either fade it in or you fade it out. All right, but a lot of these you can use kind of interchangeably. This one does work. So if you take your mouse and you put your mouse over any of these, in this case you can see where the mouse is. They're all kind of faded away, and when you highlight any one of them, all right, this is the example I mentioned before. If you keep doing this and going back and forth, if you haven't set it up, the queuing up specifically, what will happen is it tries to do everything. So it'll finish this one, but if I keep doing back and forth like this, it'll start doing the next one. All right, and it looks kind of like a waste, for lack of better words. Again, slide up, slide down, slide toggle. I don't know what more you can say about those. Hopefully just looking at them, seeing some examples, and like I said, there are plenty of examples out here. All right, so there's, for example, okay, there's a slide down, there's a slide toggle in here. Okay. Hopefully just looking at that, it's fairly self-explanatory as far as what's going on. This image one, they slide in and they slide out and they bounce, they put a little bounce on it too. All right. And then finally, when you work with this stuff, as it says, similar to height and width, you can also use them to create a resize animation. The difference between a slide and a resize is that the aspect ratio of the image is maintained on a resize. All right, that might be a very important thing. Giving the appearance that it's growing or shrinking. Okay. Trying to remember if there was anything else in here that I thought was worth mentioning, but I don't think so. So hopefully there's any questions on that? All right. If you didn't look at it previously, and especially if you had problems with it when the first assignment, you might want to take a look at Chapter 13, because what Chapter 13 is about is validating using JQuery, and that was part of what you were supposed to do for the first assignment. And virtually all of the examples that I put in here from Chapter 13 all the ones that are in here, notice this is the credit card one, for example, and you're supposed to put it in like this. Well, if I put it in like that, it doesn't validate, etc. And there's, like I said, there's a boatload of examples in here. But if you look at any of them, like the max and minimum, for example, they're all from here. And that's where I'd asked you to go out to, was that jQueryValidation.org site. All right. And I tried them. Virtually all of them, as far as I could tell, worked. All right. I prettied them up a little bit from what was out there on the system, but notice in here, the fields required, and you must use 23 or a smaller number. Pretty obvious what's going on there. As soon as I go to 23, boom, it's fine. All right, so there's a boatload of examples in this chapter that look a lot like that one. So, how to get and set form element values, dynamically building form elements, how to use form element animations, how to automatically focus elements for users, how to create a basic e-commerce web form, all right, and simple methods of validating web forms. So again, this is all the stuff that we had talked about, and we had, or you somewhat talked about, and you had on your previous assignment. All right. And they're trying to sell you in here why you should do this. And you've heard me say this kind of thing before. The idea is you can get anybody to come out to almost any website, but sometimes it's hard to keep people at a website. And especially if you're asking them to register or you're asking them to fill out a form or whatever, the easier you can make it for someone, the better the chance is, somebody's going to want to fill out the form. And that's kind of the premise behind the entire chapter here. Now, what you'll notice, as they mentioned there, is AngularJS adds to this stuff. Gives you the capability to bind web form elements to values in the data model for your web page. We'll talk about that again when we get to chapter 20 or so. I may have mentioned this previously, I may not have, but if you have not been doing it, please get used to, for any element that you put on a form, give it both an ID and give it a name, all right? And most of the time, for most controls, that'll have the same value. But you use the ID on the client side for the get element by ID, etc. You use the name on the server side. All right, you'll notice that you'll do that a lot, like for example with PHP. All right. But my hope is that you went over stuff like this last semester, and even for example with this, I hope people realize that it used to be you had to say checked equal checked. You don't have to say that anymore. Now you only have to say the word checked. It's one of the changes in HTML5. Notice in jQuery there's 3 ways to get properties and attributes from form objects. The attr, which is the attrib, the prop for property, and the val. All right. Notice the attr is used to access attributes of the DOM object that correspond to HTML attributes, ID, name, etc. Prop is used that are more JavaScript specific. All right. And the one I use most of the time is the val method. It's the easiest to use. And they give you some examples in here. As it says, it allows you to access values represented by a form object. In jQuery, they can all be accessed using the val method. For example, the following sets the value of all input elements with a type of text, all right, and then gets the value of the first one. Checkbox elements, all right, because checkboxes, sometimes at least, what you're going to find is they may be in a group, especially radio buttons as opposed to checkboxes, might be in a group, all right. But remember, when you're working on this, as it says, basically what you're saying here is checked is just going to be a Boolean, all right. Has it been selected or has it not been selected? All right. With jQuery, as it says, it's done a little bit differently. You may or may not remember this. We looked at it in an earlier chapter, but when we started talking about form elements, and when you were talking about the values of those form elements, they always had a colon in front of them. As it says, you can use the prop. You can set these up in a lot of different ways. Again, that's not my intention of giving you an assignment and saying you got to do all these different things, but you have to do one of them. All right. All right. The following code will get the value of a radio input group that's got a name mygroup in jQuery. All right. So the idea is you have to start being able to look at that, and ideally it has to make some sense to you. All right. Input, name equal mygroup, okay? And then you're filtering it just for the ones that are checked, or you're filtering it to just get the value of the checked attribute. Select inputs, as it says, they're for a series of option elements. That's one of the reasons I asked you to put in the thing with the states. All right, so you'd have the option elements, so you at least had something in there that you could work with. And as mentioned, there's a couple of values you might want to be using when accessing the select. One is the full value. To get the value, you simply use val, and they give you an example right there. You can also use the val method to set, okay? There's a get. And there's a set, okay? All right. The stuff that's in here, okay, the name, the path, the size, and the type, as mentioned, that is if you're working with different file names and you need to set sizes, you need to set types, etc. Every one of these, if you run the examples that I gave, they almost all look identical to one another. They bring up a file dialog box. Did you guys, when you had the 157 class last semester, did you talk about hidden inputs? Ever? I mean, you ever seen that before? All right, the big thing with a hidden input is that's sort of a misnomer. For instance, if let's say that I was making a, I don't know, I had some kind of a website that was an e-commerce site, and I asked you what state you were from. And based on that, I figured out what your tax would be on your item. And the idea is conceivably with 50 different states that you could have 50 different tax rates. It would be possible to do that. So I could set that up as a series of hidden inputs or hidden elements, all right, where they wouldn't actually show. The problem is nothing is truly hidden, because even if something is hidden like this, if I still go in and view the page source, I can take a look at it and see what it is. All right. But usually, you know, again, most people who go out and use the site, they could care less. You know, if I'm out on, and I do go to Pizza Hut's online site and order stuff occasionally. But when I do that, I don't right mouse click on it and do a view page source to see exactly what's going on. All right. So again, even though it says that they're hidden, they're not truly hidden. All right. Serializing, as it says, many of the input elements in a form can be easily serialized into strings or into arrays. So what they have you do in this example is they have you set a whole bunch of stuff in here, and then they take it and they throw it into a string. All right. The power of doing that is after doing that, you're able to go and work with the string, the different string functions, all right, and or the different array functions that exist in either jQuery or JavaScript. Some of the examples, I like the examples actually in this chapter. All right, you see what they're doing here. They are doing some serializing, okay, and you notice how they're combining stuff together, but then they throw it into an array and they just give you each element in there and they give it a heading, which is just kind of nice because, again, regardless of how complex the form is, you can break it down, if need be, into each one of its individual fundamental elements and do something like that. I may or may not have told you this, and Luke knows this, but the main difference between your assignment and the assignment for the second-year people was for the second-year people, what they had to do was after they filled out the form and you clicked the submit button, they had to go call a PHP file that wrote you a form letter and basically showed you a bunch of the information that you had filled in on the form. All right? And one way of doing that would be to serialize this stuff out like this, which is pretty much the way that it was done. When they talk in here about focusing and blurring form elements, I've already hit on that stuff with you. You should understand what focus means when an element gets the focus. You should understand what it means when an element gets a blur. All right, by now that should make sense to everyone who's in here. All right, and they talk in here about intelligent form flow control. Everyone goes through this stuff differently. You know, it's funny when you think of stuff like tab index. A lot of people today never use, you know, the tab key to go from field to field, but it used to be that was a very convenient way to get around, and a lot of people still do. Again, as it says, intelligently hiding and showing form elements. All right. As it says, in effect, less is more, meaning you shouldn't necessarily show users more elements than they need. The example, one of the examples they're given here is a pretty good one. You might ask someone their sex. And once they give you the sex, if it was, for example, if it was for an online catalog or something like that, all right, and you said male, well, then you could show male pants or shirts or whatever it was. And if you said female, you could show female. All right, so the idea is why show everybody everything when there may or may not be a need to. Disabling, It's funny how things have changed over time, because really before jQuery and before all the animation stuff, what we were always told was you should never make anything appear and disappear. If you don't want people to be able to use it, just disable it. All right, but that's not really as in vogue anymore as it is. But you might want it set up so that you ask somebody to make a choice on something, click a button or do whatever. And once they make a choice, you might want to disable the other choices so they can't make any more. That type of an idea. And notice it's disabled to set it, and to unset it, it's just disabled with the empty string. All right. Controlling submit and reset. Again, as I mentioned to you before, by default, when you click the submit button, it's going to go to wherever you say, wherever you've got in there action equal type of an idea. But if you put in there a prevent default, you can keep that from happening. We've talked about this before. Why would you possibly want to do that? You might want to prevent a default because you want to make sure that before you go and send something over on the server side that you've totally validated on the client side. All right, and if you find any mistakes on the client side, you want to prevent the default. You don't want it to be able to go on. Kind of a neat example in here. And you probably have seen stuff like this before. All right. But they've got some CSS. They put some rounding on the buttons and stuff to make it look a little bit nicer. Okay. Dynamically controlling form element appearance and behavior right here. As it says, it is also useful to provide visual indicators so that the user can figure out what's happening. Maybe you've seen that before where whatever field is active might have a different color, might have a bigger font, might have a different border, whatever. So many of the changes can be made using simple CSS settings, all right? But if you want to start doing animations, you might want to do more than that. The big thing that's in this chapter is, again, and as I mentioned, there's a table that's in here someplace that's got like 15 to 17 different examples of validating a form. Min, max, min length, max length, credit card, etc. It's all the stuff that's in the table that's near the end of the chapter, all the way up onto pages 378 and 379, which we'll get to in just a second. All right. So as it says, the most basic way of validating a form is to access their value and check it against whatever your requirement is. All right. There are so many different ways that you can validate a form. All right. There's so many different ways that you can validate an individual entry in a form. So you notice in the example they're showing right here, they're checking that what they're basically saying is if you put in something that's non-numeric, don't allow it to happen. You can combine this stuff as an example with regular expression handling. Okay. And then there's that jQuery validation plugin that we talked about before. All right, jQueryValidation.org. And these, I've got examples again of each one of these in here. All right. But ideally, if you do take a look at a couple of these, they go through and they explain the syntax so you can see exactly what's happening. It's one thing just to say required, but it's another thing to actually put some different lengths or types or whatever in there. And again, they talk about applying complex validation, and especially when you come in and you start adding regular expression handling, the stuff can get really complex. Some of it's simple too, okay? And you've seen some of this with HTML5, type equal email, as an example. And hopefully you realize that some of the stuff in HTML5, although it's implemented, doesn't quite work yet the way that it's supposed to. For instance, in HTML5, if you say type equal tel, that's supposed to be telephone. But typically it'll take anything you still put in there because not all the browser manufacturers, they're all saying they're going to support it, but they haven't figured out how yet. This is the advantage again right here that you get with using the jQuery plugin. The idea that you can add your own messages, you can make your own checks, etc. All right. Not only that, as mentioned here on page 380, as the author says, the validate method returns a validator object, and you can do some work with this stuff too. All right. Returns true if the element is valid, otherwise returns false. Returns true if the form elements are all valid. All right, a very fast way to go in there and do some client-side checking. Number of invalids. So how many things failed validation? Reset a form. Show the errors for a form. All right. And we've talked about some of this stuff in the past. They give an example in here on how you can do that, to just set it up so that it's red, etc. We talked about that before. All right. When they talk about error placement, okay, and they talk about using error placement and not using error placement here, and ideally you take a look at that. That's on 381 in the book. And the idea is you try to put where the error is at its source. Okay. All right. And the last example that they show in here, again, uses the jQuery validation plugin. All right. That's it for this chapter. So what we'll do, again, next class is we'll go over chapters 14, creating advanced web page elements using jQuery, and chapter 15, accessing server-side data via JavaScript and jQuery access request, or AJAX requests rather. That's a longer chapter. It's a little bit more complex chapter. All right, but we should be able to handle both of those on Wednesday. All right. So I'm going to try to spend the rest of the period starting to, again, look through your stuff. Some of you who didn't get the assignment done when it was first due have since got it done and have let me know. So I'll try to go out there and take a look at it. And I always look at it this way, that if you're late turning it in, but I'm late grading it, I tend to be a little bit more decent or fair, whatever you want to call it, as opposed to if I grade the stuff right when it's due. All right? And that's all that I have.
I get frustrated with mine. I didn't touch it. I screwed up the first time. I'm not going to make you relook at it.
I go back and relook at everybody's, except the ones that I've graded that, you know, there are 2 or 3 people in here who got 25 out of 25. So I don't feel like I have to go back and take a look at theirs again. So, but other than that, I do.